Disney presents... The Wonderful World of Color!
In the deserts of the Southwest, there lives in great numbers an animal well known but little understood. He has many names: prairie wolf, desert dog, but he's best known as the coyote. Sometimes he's a plague to ranchers, but just as often he's their servant. And so he's a subject of much controversy. The coyote has many voices, and on this spring morning, the young female had been crying out a summons to her mate. In her den, 4 pups were waiting. But her mate hadn't come home from his nightly hunt for food. Now she was setting out to find him. At any other time, she would have taken a rabbit home to her pups. But now the need to find her mate was strong, and nothing could distract her from her search. A few yards farther on, she picked up his trail. In one direction, it was fainter, in the other, stronger. The trail led her to a sandy ridge and the end of her quest. Every instinct warned her away, told her there was danger here, but deep concern outweighed her natural caution. Her mate was dead, and she was aware of the finality of death.
Let's get going.
The rancher, like many others, didn't understand coyotes and didn't want to. True, they kept down the jackrabbits in his alfalfa patch, but they also raided his hen house. So he was determined to hunt down and kill all coyotes.
There she goes! We gotta run a road now. Come on, won't this thing go no faster? We're doing 60 now, boss.
The coyote couldn't understand why, but something had happened to her pursuers. The chase was over. It was safe to head for home. Her 4 pups had been taught never to leave the den while their mother was away. 2 of them whiled away their time napping in the sun, but not Chico. He was always a busy bundle of energy. Now he saw that brother number 4 had a bone. Naturally, he wanted it. Because he was persistent and aggressive, Chico always got what he wanted. As a rule, Mother's return meant a time for play. But this time, it was all business, serious business. She made it plain she wanted them out of sight, inside the den. The mother coyote made one last check outside. Chico. And now a scrap of bone might well cost their lives. Time was running out.
Probably got a den up in them rocks somewhere. Come on, let's look around. Hey, boss, I found something up here. Yep. There and they're all right.
Out of a gunny sack, into a chicken wire prison. Of all his family, Chico alone had survived.
Sure a scroungy looking animal.
Oh, he'll come along okay.
He'd better, or I'm out $2.
You said you'd pay $3.
$2. Take it or leave it.
All right, I'll take it.
Chico's new owner, Frank Miller, wasn't as heartless as he sounded. He was neither kind nor cruel to animals. They had simply become a part of his business. For one thin dime, Frank's patrons could get a first-hand look at some of the desert's most formidable inhabitants. Only the desert viper was a gopher snake. Then there was an aging raccoon, a tortoise, a toothless bobcat, a scraggly owl, and a descended skunk. Wild animals, suddenly confined, sometimes go into deep shock. It had happened to Chico. Frank Miller knew this, but maybe a little food would arouse the coyote's will to live.
Here's some grub.
But Chico had already chosen to die of starvation rather than live in captivity. That little morsel of food, though, looked mighty good to a small freeloader that just happened by. The possessive instinct is strong in all animals. And the moment Chico saw that the pack rat wanted his food, then he wanted it too. So this was the first turning point. He would eat, and he would live. In the months that followed, Chico grew rapidly, but he never accepted captivity. Instead, he learned to hate and fear all people. And that was because every day the faces came to frighten him and bring back memories of that last terrible morning in the den. When Chico was almost full grown, he got a promotion, and he made the most of it. He could roam around now and pick up the scraps the customers tossed to him. And with the cast iron stomach of the Coyote breed, he ate everything that fell within the circle of his chain, from cookies to candy wrappers. Then one day he found a real prize. He couldn't know it was loaded with poison. Frank had been killing off the gophers with strychnine. When Frank found him a couple of hours later, he could pretty well guess what had happened. He didn't think there was much chance of saving the coyote's life, but he'd sure give it a try. The thunderstorm that hit that night broke the desert hot spell. The cool, refreshing air, along with the milk that Frank had forced down his throat, helped turn the trick for Chico. He'd passed the crisis. But a coyote, sick or injured, will often play possum. With the amazing resistance of his kind, Chico was gaining strength every second. All he wanted now was food. Milk was all right for a starter, but he needed something more substantial. He didn't get the cheese, but he did get a lesson. The smell of a trap was something he would remember for a long time. The next thing was to find a way out of here. A spatter of rain told him there was an opening in the ceiling. Then he began to trace the route by which he could reach it. It seemed a jumbled maze, but slowly, carefully, he figured it out. Now he had it, from the chair to the desk, to the trunk, and then from the trunk to the boxes. He wasn't hurt, only shaken up, but he was too tired to try again.
Well, you made it, huh?
A customer came first. The coyote could wait. But Chico knew he couldn't wait. Now it was the chain or freedom. It took him a moment to get his bearings and realize that he was still very much a captive. There was the open desert, only a step away, but it was a long step. There was a way down, if he had the courage to take it.
Hey! How'd you get out? Come here, you. Ow!
So ended one phase in the education of Chico. Now he must enroll again in the School of Nature. For the moment, though, lessons could wait. In the sun-baked sand, he tried to rub out every trace of the hated scent of man. Then a wild and carefree romp, and the wonderful feeling of just being alive and free. He was having so much fun that he wanted to share it with somebody. But the tortoise wasn't exactly the running and jumping type. Now, the roadrunner had more get up and go. Trouble was, he got up and went. Then he found a Gila monster. But instinct warned Chico to avoid this package of poison. By afternoon, a growing hunger had begun to replace Chico's high spirits. And yet he had no experience in hunting. He became aware that he was very thirsty, too, and now he caught the scent of water. It came from over there. A desert water bag dropped from the bumper of a passing car. It was Chico's for the taking, but how to take it? Chico needed no more convincing. In the desert, man seemed to be everywhere. Perhaps the nearby foothills would offer refuge. And with the double drives of fear and hunger, the coyote climbed steadily for several hours. At last, he came to a place that seemed to promise the end of his troubles. There was no sign of man, and there was certainly enough water to satisfy his thirst for a long time to come. Now, what about food? Well, there was something over there on that log. Chico had a few things to learn about frogs. They just won't stay put. And in this case, neither would the logs. Also, frogs can swim. As a desert animal, Chico didn't know anything at all about swimming. But if he ever wanted to make landfall, he was going to have to learn. put off the lesson as long as he could, but there was no escaping the inevitable. There just had to be an easier way to get a meal. Of course, over there. He didn't know what they were, but they were close to shore. All he had to do was hop over and help himself. It was pretty plain that Chico was going to need some lessons in duck hunting, too. He had to find food somewhere, and since he was determined to avoid the desert, the only way to go was up. It was just a month later that the coming of winter brought an end to Chico's time of easy living. Ever since the first snowfall, had been trying to stir up some sign of life in the badger burrow, but the badger was already deep in hibernation. And so with his daily supply of mice cut off, Chico began to realize that he would have to hunt for himself. He didn't like the idea and said so. The lack of nourishing food had thinned out his coat. He was cold and lean and ragged. This was, of course, his first experience with snow. And while it eased his thirst, it did nothing at all for his appetite. Finding game in snow country isn't easy, even for a mountain-bred coyote. For Chico, born in the desert, it would be almost impossible. There was game here, though. Big game. Chico didn't know just how dangerous that thing was. But if a feast meant a fight, he was willing. Only it didn't work out quite that way. Well, maybe a kiss on the nose was better than a kick in the teeth. Might as well forget the whole thing. But wait a minute. It was plain this fellow was looking for food, and maybe, like the badger, he'd turn up a dividend for a hungry coyote. Chico was getting a little confused. Had he seen a mouse or hadn't he? One thing was certain, he sure saw that rabbit. Chico didn't know anything about bobcats. He'd never met one before. But he did know that was his rabbit, and he meant to have it. The fight turned out to be a standoff, and it came to a sudden end when the bobcat took the rabbit into the tall timber. This was one maneuver Chico couldn't match. It was inevitable that Chico's search for food would eventually take him out of the bleak high country down to the warmer slopes below. Here he found game in plenty. And yet no sooner was one hunger satisfied than a strange new hunger began. It was the driving urge of his maturity, the need to find a mate. He wandered aimlessly for days. He knew he was looking for something, but he didn't know what it was. And then, late one afternoon, he saw her. She came to him eagerly. Her name was Chula. The warm affection of their greeting was in keeping with Coyote ritual, and so too was their song of love and joy. Months passed. It was May, exactly 7 weeks since Tula's pups had been born. Chiquito was the male, Chulita the female. Like all youngsters, they were curious and playful. They didn't care what their playthings were, but they argued incessantly over whose they were. Like all male coyotes, Chico was a good father, devoted to his family. Until now, Chula had stayed close to the den, training her pups, guarding them from danger. But today, she decided they were old enough to be left alone for a while. For the first time in weeks, she would join Chico on his daily hunt for food. So far, no real peril had ever threatened the pups. But there was one predator that Chula hadn't reckoned on, the golden eagle. Chulita was the unlucky one, but Chiquito got away. Although he was safe from the eagle now, the pup found himself in a strange and frightening world, and it seemed there was no way out. At least, not this way. He followed the floor of the ravine until it opened into a rocky meadow. All he wanted was to find a way home. Instead, he found a mother rock squirrel. But when it came to coyotes, lost or otherwise, she was quite antisocial. Her babies didn't offer any help either. They were too busy with breakfast. It was a little farther on that Chiquito came upon an old acquaintance of his father's, the badger. For the lonely pup, here was company and a good place to hide till his mother found him. In spite of the badger's objections, he was determined to move in. Just a little remodeling, and there'd be plenty of room for both of them. The badger just didn't see it that way. If that pesky pup wanted the burrow, then he could have it, dirt and all. This didn't satisfy Chiquito either. He'd been looking for a friend. And if the badger was moving out, then so was he. When Chico returned to the den, he hadn't stopped to mourn the loss of Chulita, but had set off at once to look for Chiquito. As it turned out, he no sooner found the pup's trail than the pup found him. It was a happy reunion, although Chico would have preferred just a little less enthusiasm. When the first nip of autumn chilled the air, Chico, remembering the hardships of winter, decided it was time to forsake their mountain home. Chiquito was almost full grown now. The journey to the desert took only a few hours. Chico had come home. Although he felt a sense of well-being, he had never forgotten that this was also the abode of man. The broad alfalfa fields that rimmed the desert would be ideal hunting grounds for the coyotes, for here the jackrabbits lived and thrived in great numbers. Jackrabbits were the ranchers' biggest headache. They could and did ruin many an alfalfa crop. Coyotes were nature's own way of keeping the rabbits under control. The fence was meant to keep the varmints out, but Chico used it as a means of penning the rabbit in. After their meal, the coyotes began to look for a permanent home, a place not too far from the alfalfa fields, yet not too close to man. On the bank of the dry riverbed, Chico discovered a likely-looking burrow. While he made sure it was unoccupied and would fit their needs, Tula and Chiquito enjoyed an after-dinner romp. Apparently, the burrow had been abandoned for a long time, so Chico gave the signal for his family to move in. Chiquito and Tula would live in the den, but Chico would make his bed on the lookout point above. He had hardly settled for the night when he heard a distant call. It was the voice of his own kind. To Chico, the summons of the pack was irresistible. The pack was a group of three, strangers to this valley, just passing through. They considered Chico the permanent resident here, and so they gave him a cordial greeting and invited him to join their glee club. A community sing is a common practice among coyotes, and sometimes, by accident or design, their voices will blend in an eerie harmony that is wild and weird and wonderful. As soon as the songfest was over, the three strangers abruptly took off. Chico tagged along behind. Chico had no idea what his new friends had in mind, but whatever it was, he wanted to be one of the gang. Until he saw what they were up to. Then some old and bitter memories stopped him cold.
What happened, boss?
Coyotes are here again. We got to clean them out.
Chico's fears were well-founded. Next morning, the old range war began all over again. Chico didn't know it, but he and his family were the only ones left behind to fight the battle for the coyotes. The real chicken thieves had already hightailed it into another county. The rancher's campaign began with a scouting party, and by late afternoon, he'd planted secret weapons in all the most strategic places. But Chico had learned much in the days of his captivity, and the minute he caught the scent of steel, his instant caution warned his family to stay clear. He knew what a trap was and what to do with it.
Smart varmints. They sprung this one, too.
We might as well pull them then.
Okay, boss.
We'll never get them this way anyway.
Boss, with all the rabbits around, maybe we ought to let the coyotes go for a while. Let them take care of the pests for us.
My chickens and half the stock, too?
I could put out some old scrap iron. They'd think that that was traps and probably stay away from here.
We'll do this my way. Strychnine always gets them.
Next morning, it was only Chico's amazing memory that saved his family from certain death. He remembered the smell of strychnine and led his family away from the poisoned bait. It was just a week later, in broad daylight, that the rancher's chicken coop was hit by another raid. Chico had an alibi. He'd been off chasing rabbits in the alfalfa patch. Tula had never learned to fear man. To her, the chicken coop had been a promise of plenty for a long time to come. All Chico saw was the promise of more trouble, and all he wanted was to avoid it. Hunting coyotes from the air is common in the Southwest and all too successful. When his traps and poison had failed, the rancher figured he was up against the smartest coyote ever. And so he resorted to these two ultimate weapons in his arsenal, a gun and an airplane. The rancher couldn't know that Chico was already on the run. He'd sensed there was only one way to prevent another raid on the chicken coop. He was moving out, taking his family back to the high country. Then he saw the great bird. Terrified, the coyote's first instinct was to find cover. The rancher thought he saw a movement in the brush. If it was a coyote, there was one sure way to flush him out. With their hiding place discovered, Chico knew there was only one thing left to do. He had made himself a decoy to save his family. Chico was beginning to tire, and with every pass, the bird was coming closer.
Well, I finally got him.
Yeah, we got him. No gas. We'll have to be heading back.
Chico was no ordinary coyote. Stung by flying gravel from the near miss, he had simply rolled over and played dead. It's an old coyote trick, and Chico had used it before. It was safe now. The bird was gone. It was a joyous family reunion. In the distant high country, Chico and his family would find peace and safety. And yet the real happy ending to their story will come only when man understands his need for these desert predators that help maintain nature's balance, which in turn ensures the survival of all.